Fear has a scent, the old wolves used to say. And somewhere in the world, the one destined to find you can smell it before they ever see your face. Rowan Blackthorn woke with a sharp breath lodged in his chest. For a moment, he didn't know where he was. Moonlight spilled through the towering windows of his chamber, painting silver lines across the stone floor. The fire in the hearth had nearly burned out, leaving only a faint orange glow against the darkness. Yet none of that explained the feeling gripping him. Fear. Not his fear. Someone else's. It hit him without warning, cold and sudden, like stepping into icy water before sunrise. His heartbeat quickened. His hands tightened against the blankets. The emotion felt real. Too real. A desperate kind of fear. The kind that lived deep inside a person who had nowhere left to run. Rowan sat upright. The sensation lingered for another second before fading into silence. He stared into the darkness. Then it was gone. The Alpha King rarely dreamed. He rarely questioned his instincts. For 15 years, those instincts had helped him lead the Northern Kingdom through storms, disputes, and hardships. Yet this felt different. He swung his legs over the edge of the bed and crossed the chamber. The floor was cool beneath his bare feet. Outside, the mountains stretched beneath a blanket of moonlight, silent and endless. Everything looked peaceful. But his chest still felt strangely tight. Somewhere, someone was afraid. And somehow, he had felt it. Hundreds of miles away, beyond the forests that marked the edge of wolf territory, Evelyn Hart pulled her cloak tighter around her shoulders. Dawn was still an hour away. The sky above the eastern horizon carried only the faintest hint of gray. Frost covered the grass beside the narrow trail. Each breath escaped her lips in a pale cloud. She glanced over her shoulder for what felt like the 100th time. Nothing moved behind her. No voices. No footsteps. No signs that anyone had followed. Yet the fear remained. Evelyn lowered her gaze and kept walking. Her boots pressed softly against the frozen earth. The small canvas bag hanging from her shoulder carried everything she owned. A spare dress. A loaf of bread. A silver necklace that had belonged to her mother. Nothing more. She had left before anyone in the pack could stop her. Before anyone could decide her future for her. The memory made her throat tighten. She pushed it away. There was no use thinking about yesterday. Only forward mattered now. Ahead, through the thin morning mist, ancient stone pillars emerged from the darkness. The elven border. The sight stopped her cold. The pillars towered nearly 20 feet high, weathered by centuries of wind and rain. Strange symbols covered their surfaces, glowing faintly beneath the fading stars. Stories about this place had filled her childhood. Some called it sacred. Others called it cursed. Most wolves avoided it entirely. Evelyn swallowed hard. Her pulse quickened. Beyond those stones stretched a world she had never seen. A world where she knew no one. A world where she could disappear completely. For a moment, uncertainty wrapped around her like winter fog. Then she took a slow breath and stepped forward. The instant her foot crossed the invisible boundary between kingdoms, a faint shimmer raced through the carvings on the ancient pillars. The symbols glowed brighter for less than a second before fading once more. Evelyn never noticed. But far away, standing alone beside the window of his chamber, Rowan Blackthorn suddenly froze. The fear returned. Stronger than before. And for the first time in his life, the Alpha King realized it was calling him somewhere. By the time the sun finally climbed above the distant hills, Evelyn Hart had already crossed deeper into territory she had only heard about in stories. The forest felt different here. The air carried a sweetness she could not name. Sunlight filtered through towering silver-barked trees, scattering pieces of gold across the moss-covered ground. Even the birds sounded unfamiliar. Yet none of it eased the knot in her chest. She had escaped, but she was not free. Not yet. Evelyn followed a narrow path winding between ancient roots. Her legs ached from walking through the night. Every few minutes she glanced behind her, half expecting to see someone from her pack emerging from the shadows. No one appeared. Still, the fear remained. It had lived inside her for so long that she barely remembered what life felt like without it. She remembered being 10 years old, sitting alone outside the pack house while the other children ran and laughed together. She remembered hearing the whispers. Quiet girl. Strange girl. Weak Omega. The words had followed her through every season of her life. As she grew older, the whispers only changed shape. While others found places within the pack, Evelyn seemed to exist on the edges of everything. Never important enough to notice. Never valuable enough to protect. Her father had once told her that silence was a gift. But after her mother passed away, even he had stopped saying it. The memory stung. She reached beneath her cloak and touched the silver necklace resting against her chest. It had belonged to her mother. The metal was cool beneath her fingertips. Somehow it always made her feel less alone. A soft breeze moved through the trees. Evelyn stopped walking. Something felt wrong. Not dangerous exactly. Just strange. The forest had gone unusually quiet. Even the birds had stopped singing. She stood still and listened. Nothing. Only the distant rustle of leaves. After a long moment she forced herself to continue. She could not afford to turn back. Back meant returning to a future that no longer belonged to her. 2 weeks earlier, she had overheard the conversation that changed everything. It had happened late at night. She had been carrying laundry past her father's study when she heard her name. She never intended to listen. But then she heard the words agreement and arrangement. She froze outside the door. Inside, 2 men discussed her future as though she were not a person at all. A marriage contract had already been drafted. Decisions had already been made. No one planned to ask what she wanted. No one seemed to care. Evelyn had stood there in silence, listening until her hands shook. That night she made her choice. She would leave before anyone could decide the rest of her life for her. Ahead, the trail curved around a cluster of enormous trees. As Evelyn stepped forward, a faint warmth spread through the necklace beneath her cloak. She paused and looked down. For a brief second, the silver pendant seemed to glow. Then the light disappeared. Evelyn blinked. Perhaps exhaustion was playing tricks on her. She adjusted the strap of her bag and continued walking. Far away in the northern kingdom, Rowan Blackthorn stood before a map stretched across a council table. Advisors spoke around him. Reports were delivered. Questions were asked. Yet the Alpha King heard almost none of it. Because somewhere beyond the mountains, beyond the forests, beyond the borders of his realm, a quiet Omega was still afraid. And somehow, he could feel every heartbeat of it. Some places felt old. Others felt ancient. But this forest felt alive. Evelyn noticed it as the afternoon sun drifted higher overhead. The deeper she traveled, the more the world seemed to change around her. The trees grew taller. Their silver trunks twisted toward the sky like pillars supporting an invisible cathedral. Strange flowers bloomed along the forest floor, their pale petals shimmering softly whenever sunlight touched them. Even the air felt different. Lighter somehow. Yet beneath that beauty, something watched. Not with hostility. Not with danger. Simply awareness. The sensation followed her for miles. At first she ignored it. Then she began noticing small things. Branches bending without wind. Flickers of movement disappearing the moment she looked directly at them. Tiny lights dancing between the trees before fading into nothing. The stories were true after all. Elven lands were filled with old magic. Evelyn wrapped her arms around herself and kept walking. Her feet were growing sore. She had covered nearly 12 miles since sunrise. The loaf of bread in her bag was almost gone. Soon she would need to find shelter before nightfall. The thought made her uneasy. She had never spent a night completely alone in unfamiliar wilderness. Suddenly a distant sound echoed through the forest. Not loud. Not threatening. A single clear note that sounded almost like a bell. Evelyn stopped. Another note followed. Then another. Beautiful. Gentle. Melodic. The sound drifted through the trees like music carried by the wind. Without realizing it, she found herself following it. The melody guided her along a narrow trail hidden beneath hanging vines. After several minutes, the forest opened into a small clearing. Evelyn froze. In the center stood a pool of crystal-clear water. Sunlight reflected across its surface in shimmering patterns. White flowers floated along the edges. Everything looked untouched. Peaceful. Sacred. She stepped closer. The necklace beneath her cloak suddenly grew warm again. Much warmer than before. Startled, Evelyn pulled it free. The silver pendant glowed faintly against her palm. This time there was no mistaking it. Light pulsed beneath the smooth metal. Once. Twice. Then the glow faded. Evelyn stared at it in confusion. Her mother had worn this necklace her entire life. Never once had she mentioned anything unusual about it. 1,000 questions filled her mind. Before she could examine it further, a voice spoke behind her. "You should not be here alone." Evelyn spun around so quickly she nearly dropped the pendant. Standing beneath the trees was a young woman dressed in pale green clothing. Her silver hair fell nearly to her waist. Her ears tapered into elegant points. An elf. The first Evelyn had ever seen. The stranger studied her with calm golden eyes. Not cold. Not unfriendly. Simply curious. Evelyn swallowed nervously. "I am sorry," she said. "I did not realize this place belonged to someone." A faint smile touched the elf's face. "It belongs to no one." Her gaze shifted to the necklace still resting in Evelyn's hand. For the briefest moment, surprise flashed across her expression. Then it vanished. "Where did you get that?" she asked quietly. Hundreds of miles away, Rowan Blackthorn abruptly rose from his chair during a council meeting. Every conversation stopped. Every advisor turned toward him. The Alpha King ignored them all. Because for the first time since the strange connection began, he felt something besides fear. Confusion. Curiosity. And beneath it all, the unmistakable feeling that someone had just crossed the path of destiny itself. The question lingered in the air long after the elf spoke it. Evelyn instinctively closed her fingers around the pendant. "It belonged to my mother," she answered softly. "She wore it every day until she passed away." The elf's golden eyes remained fixed on the silver necklace. For several seconds she said nothing. The forest around them seemed unusually still, as though even the wind was waiting. Finally, the elf stepped closer. "Your mother was not from these lands?" Evelyn shook her head. "I do not know. She never spoke much about where she came from before joining our pack." The elf's expression grew thoughtful. Sometimes the oldest secrets survive because no one remembers they are secrets. Evelyn frowned. "What does that mean?" Instead of answering directly, the elf looked toward the glowing pool. Sunlight danced across the water, casting silver reflections beneath the surrounding trees. "My name is Lyra," she said. "I serve as a keeper of this sanctuary. Very few travelers ever find this place." "I am Evelyn." "I know." The reply surprised her. Lyra smiled faintly. "The forest has been whispering about you since dawn." Evelyn was not sure whether the elf was joking. Judging by her calm expression, she suspected she was not. The warmth beneath her fingers returned. She glanced down. Once again, the pendant seemed to pulse with faint light. Lyra noticed immediately. "May I see it?" After a moment of hesitation, Evelyn extended her hand. The elf carefully lifted the necklace. The instant her fingers touched the silver chain, the air around them seemed to shimmer. Tiny lights appeared above the surface of the pool, floating like drifting stars. Evelyn stared in amazement. Lyra looked far less surprised. If anything, she seemed concerned. This should not be possible, the elf whispered. What should not be possible? Evelyn asked. Lyra slowly returned the necklace. This symbol has not awakened in centuries. Before Evelyn could ask another question, a distant sound echoed through the forest. Hoofbeats. Not many. Perhaps 3 or 4 riders. The sound was faint but unmistakable. Evelyn felt her stomach tighten immediately. Fear rushed through her so suddenly that she could barely breathe. The reaction was automatic. Old. Familiar. Lyra turned toward the trees, listening carefully. They are not close, she said. But they are searching for someone. Evelyn lowered her eyes. She already knew who that someone was. Hundreds of miles away, Rowan Blackthorn gripped the edge of the council table. The fear slammed into him without warning. Stronger than ever before. Advisors exchanged uneasy glances. The Alpha King rarely showed emotion, yet concern flashed openly across his face. He could feel her panic. He could feel her uncertainty. Most troubling of all, he could feel the urge she was fighting deep inside herself. The urge to run. Rowan straightened slowly. His long dark hair brushed against the collar of his fur-lined cloak. Silver eyes narrowed toward the eastern wall, as though he could somehow see beyond mountains and kingdoms. The connection was growing stronger with every passing hour. Whatever force had linked him to the unknown Omega was no longer fading. It was deepening. And for the first time, the Alpha King began to suspect that finding her was no longer a choice. It was becoming destiny. Some fears faded with distance. Others grew stronger the farther you ran. Evelyn discovered that truth before sunset. She had left the sanctuary shortly after speaking with Lyra. The elf had offered directions to a nearby village hidden within the outer reaches of the Elven Realm, a place where travelers could rest safely for the night. It sounded simple enough. Yet the farther Evelyn walked from the crystal pool, the heavier her thoughts became. Questions followed every step. Why had the necklace reacted the way it did? Why had Lyra seemed so startled by it? And most of all, why did it feel as though her entire life had begun changing the moment she crossed the border? The forest path narrowed as evening approached. Golden sunlight filtered through the trees, casting long shadows across the ground. Evelyn adjusted the strap of her bag and continued forward. She estimated she had less than 2 hours before darkness settled over the forest. Then she heard voices. Faint. Distant. Her body tensed immediately. The voices were too far away to understand, but they were real. More than one person. Moving through the woods. Searching. Evelyn instinctively stepped behind a thick silver-barked tree and listened. The conversation drifted closer for a moment before fading again. Relief washed over her. Whoever they were not following her trail directly. At least not yet. She waited another minute before emerging from hiding. The moment she did, something flashed through the trees ahead. A figure. Gone almost instantly. Evelyn stopped walking. Her pulse quickened. Hello, she called softly. No answer came. Only silence. She told herself it was her imagination. Fatigue. Stress. Too many sleepless nights. Yet she could not shake the feeling that unseen eyes were watching her progress through the forest. Not threatening. Simply observing. High above, hidden among branches and fading sunlight, several silent figures exchanged glances before disappearing deeper into the canopy. Word was already spreading among the elves. A human Omega carrying an ancient symbol had entered their lands. And ancient symbols attracted ancient attention. Meanwhile, inside the northern kingdom, Rowan Blackthorn stood alone on a stone balcony overlooking miles of mountain wilderness. Evening winds stirred his long dark hair and the heavy fur of his cloak. Below him, the capital city glowed beneath the fading light. Normally the sight brought him peace. Today it brought nothing. The connection had become impossible to ignore. Every few hours he felt another glimpse of her emotions. Uncertainty. Curiosity. Loneliness. The sensations arrived without warning and disappeared just as quickly. Yet each one left a deeper impression behind. She felt real to him now. Not a mystery. Not a distant presence. A person. Somewhere beyond the horizon, she was walking through unfamiliar woods wondering whether she had made the right choice. Rowan closed his eyes. Suddenly another emotion reached him. Sharp. Immediate. Alarm. His eyes snapped open. Hundreds of miles away, Evelyn had stopped in the middle of the trail. Ahead stood an ancient stone archway covered in glowing vines. Beautiful. Silent. Unmistakably old. And carved into its center was the exact same symbol engraved on the pendant hanging around her neck. For a moment, the entire forest seemed to hold its breath. The symbol carved into the stone archway seemed to glow brighter with every passing second. Evelyn stood frozen beneath the fading evening light, her hand instinctively closing around the pendant resting against her chest. The designs were identical. Every curve. Every line. Every tiny detail. A chill traveled down her spine. Her mother had never spoken about this symbol. Not once. Yet here it stood in the heart of the Elven Realm as though it had been waiting for her arrival. The forest around her remained silent. Even the distant birds had grown quiet. Slowly, Evelyn stepped closer. The ancient stone rose nearly 15 feet above her, covered in silver vines and pale flowers that seemed untouched by time. As she approached, the pendant grew warm again. Not painfully warm. Comforting. Familiar. Like sunlight resting against her skin after a long winter. She lifted the necklace into the fading light. The silver surface shimmered. Then something unexpected happened. Tiny points of light appeared around the archway. At first there were only a few. Then dozens. Hundreds. They drifted through the air like floating stars, gathering around the ancient stone in slow circles. Evelyn stared in amazement. The lights did not frighten her. Somehow they felt welcoming. Almost happy. A soft voice interrupted her thoughts. You found it. Evelyn turned. Lyra stepped from between the trees, her silver hair glowing softly beneath the evening sky. Several other elves stood behind her, watching quietly. None appeared hostile. Yet their expressions carried a seriousness that made Evelyn's heart beat faster. What is this place? She asked. Lyra approached the archway and rested her hand against the weathered stone. Long ago, before wolves and elves separated into different kingdoms, there were guardians who protected the balance between the realms. Her golden eyes moved toward the pendant. This symbol belonged to them. Evelyn looked down at the necklace. Then why do I have it? Lyra remained silent for a moment. That is the question everyone will soon be asking. Far away, Rowan Blackthorn stood inside the royal archives deep beneath his castle. Ancient books covered the stone tables surrounding him. Scrolls lay open beside maps older than the kingdom itself. Across from him stood an elderly advisor named Cedric, one of the few scholars trusted by the crown. Rowan placed a drawing of the symbol onto the table. He had sketched it only minutes earlier after seeing it flash through the strange connection. Cedric's face immediately lost all color. Where did you see this? The old scholar whispered. Rowan's silver eyes narrowed. You recognize it. Cedric slowly lowered himself into a chair. Your Majesty, this symbol belongs to a legend most believe is forgotten. He swallowed carefully. It marks the bloodline of the first guardians. Silence filled the archive. Rowan stared at the drawing. The connection pulsed again. This time he felt something entirely new. Wonder. The emotion arrived from Evelyn like a beam of light cutting through darkness. For the first time since the mysterious bond began, fear was not the strongest feeling reaching him. Hope was. And somehow that frightened him more than anything else. Hope can be more dangerous than fear when it gives you something to lose. Evelyn did not sleep that night. Lyra and the other elves had guided her to a small guest house hidden among enormous silver trees. Lanterns filled with gentle blue light hung from the branches overhead, illuminating wooden walkways that seemed to float above the forest floor. Everything felt peaceful. Safe. Yet her mind refused to rest. The words "First Guardians" echoed through her thoughts again and again. She sat beside a circular window watching moonlight spill across the village below. Somewhere out there, answers existed. Somewhere, her mother had left behind a truth she had never shared. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Lyra stepped inside carrying a steaming cup filled with herbal tea. "You should try to sleep," the elf said gently. Evelyn accepted the cup with a grateful smile. "I keep feeling like everything is changing too fast." Lyra nodded as though she understood completely. Sometimes destiny arrives quietly. Other times it arrives all at once. Evelyn stared into the swirling steam. "Do you really believe I am connected to those legends?" "I believe the forest has not reacted this way in hundreds of years." The answer was careful. Honest. Yet it offered little comfort. After Lyra left, Evelyn finally drifted into a restless sleep. Her dreams felt strange. Fragments of places she had never seen. Snow-covered mountains. Endless pine forests. Silver eyes watching from across a great distance. A voice she could not quite hear. Then she woke suddenly just before dawn. Her heart was racing. Not from fear. From urgency. She could not explain it. Something was happening. Far away, Rowan Blackthorn had reached the same conclusion. Before sunrise, the royal courtyard buzzed with quiet activity. Horses were prepared. Supplies gathered. Trusted guards assembled. The Alpha King stood at the center of it all wearing a dark travel cloak lined with gray wolf fur. His long black hair moved in the cold morning wind. Cedric approached carrying several ancient scrolls tucked beneath one arm. "Your Majesty, if these records are correct, the symbol appeared only during moments that shaped the future of entire kingdoms." Rowan's gaze remained fixed toward the eastern horizon. "Then we are already late." Cedric hesitated. "You truly intend to leave the capital?" Rowan finally looked at him. "For days I have felt her fear. Her doubts. Her loneliness. Last night I felt hope." The old scholar said nothing. Rowan rarely spoke about emotions, especially his own. The fact that he spoke of hers instead only made the situation more extraordinary. As the first rays of sunlight touched the mountains, the connection surged once again. This time Rowan saw more than emotion. For a brief second an image flashed through his mind. A village hidden among silver trees. Blue lanterns glowing in the dawn. And a young woman standing beside a window with golden sunlight touching her hair. The vision vanished almost immediately. Yet it was enough. Rowan mounted his horse. There was no uncertainty left now. Somewhere beyond the border, the mysterious Omega was moving closer to a truth powerful enough to awaken ancient legends. And with every passing hour, destiny seemed determined to bring them toward the same path. By midday, the forest itself seemed to be guiding Evelyn forward. Paths appeared where moments earlier there had been none. Sunlight broke through the canopy in perfect ribbons of gold, illuminating each turn as though unseen hands were lighting the way. Lyra walked beside her in thoughtful silence while two elven guardians followed several yards behind. None of them appeared surprised by the strange journey unfolding around them. Only Evelyn felt overwhelmed by it all. "Where are we going?" she finally asked. Lyra glanced toward the distant hills rising above the treetops. "To a place that remembers what the world has forgotten." The answer raised more questions than it answered. Yet before Evelyn could ask another, the pendant beneath her cloak grew warm once again. This time the sensation was stronger. A steady pulse. almost like a heartbeat. She pressed her hand against it. Instantly, a wave of emotion washed through her. Determination. Focus. Resolve. The feelings were not her own. Evelyn stopped walking. Her breath caught. The strange connection lasted only seconds before fading. But the sensation felt unmistakably real. Somewhere, someone was searching for something. Or someone. Hundreds of miles away, Rowan guided his horse along a mountain pass leading east. His escort remained several yards behind, careful not to disturb his concentration. The connection had changed again. For the first time, he had felt her awareness touch his own. Brief. Fleeting. Yet impossible to ignore. He had spent days experiencing her emotions. Now it seemed she was beginning to feel echoes of his as well. The realization settled heavily in his chest. Whatever force connected them was growing stronger with every mile. By late afternoon, Evelyn and the elves reached a valley hidden between towering cliffs. She stopped in awe. An enormous structure stood at its center. Neither castle nor temple. It appeared carved directly into the mountainside itself. White stone gleamed beneath the sunlight. Ancient towers rose into the sky. Crystal bridges connected terraces filled with silver trees and flowing gardens. The sight stole her breath. "What is this place?" she whispered. Lyra's expression softened. "The sanctuary of the first guardians." Evelyn stared at the magnificent structure. Something deep inside her stirred. Not recognition exactly. Familiarity. As though some forgotten part of her soul remembered standing here long ago. As they approached the entrance, dozens of elves emerged from the sanctuary. Some wore elegant robes embroidered with silver thread. Others carried ancient staffs carved with glowing symbols. Every gaze settled upon Evelyn. Not with suspicion. With wonder. The crowd parted silently as an elderly elf stepped forward. His hair was white as snow, his posture straight despite his age. His eyes settled upon the pendant hanging around Evelyn's neck. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Then the elder bowed his head. A gesture so unexpected that Evelyn almost stepped backward. Murmurs rippled through the gathered elves. The elder's voice carried across the courtyard. "After centuries of silence, the bloodline has returned." Evelyn's heart pounded. She looked toward Lyra, hoping for an explanation. Instead, she found surprise shining even in the younger elf's eyes. Far beyond the valley, Rowan suddenly felt a surge of emotion unlike anything before. Shock. Wonder. Recognition. The feelings struck both of them at exactly the same moment. And for the first time, neither of them felt alone. The elder's words echoed through the sanctuary long after the courtyard had fallen silent. The bloodline has returned. Evelyn stood motionless as dozens of eyes remained fixed upon her. Part of her wanted to ask questions. Another part feared the answers. The silver pendant rested against her chest, warm and steady now, as though it had finally found the place it belonged. The elder stepped closer. His expression carried neither excitement nor fear. Only certainty. "Your mother knew," he said softly. Evelyn's breath caught. "Knew what?" The old elf smiled sadly. "That one day you would come here." The world seemed to tilt beneath her feet. For years she had believed her mother carried ordinary secrets. Small secrets. Human secrets. Nothing like this. If she knew, then why did she never tell me? The elder's gaze drifted toward the mountains surrounding the sanctuary. Because some truths become dangerous before the right moment arrives. Before Evelyn could respond, the pendant suddenly pulsed with brilliant light. Gasps swept through the gathered elves. Silver patterns appeared across the courtyard stones, glowing beneath everyone's feet. The ancient symbols spread outward in delicate lines, connecting pillars, stairways, and towers throughout the sanctuary. It was as though the entire mountain had awakened. At that exact moment, hundreds of miles away, Rowan Blackthorn reined in his horse atop a ridge overlooking the eastern forests. The connection surged stronger than ever before. Not fear. Not uncertainty. Not loneliness. Clarity. For the first time, he could sense her presence as distinctly as if she stood only a few steps away. He closed his eyes. A vision flashed through his mind. A courtyard of white stone. Silver light. A young woman standing at the center of an ancient circle. Golden sunlight touched her hair as she looked toward the horizon. Then, unexpectedly, Evelyn saw something too. The image appeared without warning. A mountain ridge. Endless pine forests. A tall man wearing a dark cloak trimmed with wolf fur. Long black hair moving in the wind. Silver eyes focused on the distance. The vision lasted only a heartbeat. Yet it felt more real than any dream she had ever known. Evelyn staggered slightly. The elder caught her arm before she could lose balance. "You saw him," he said quietly. It was not a question. Evelyn looked up in shock. "Who is he?" A faint smile touched the elder's face. "The one the bond has been searching for." Silence settled across the sanctuary. Deep within her heart, something finally clicked into place. All the strange emotions. The fear she had somehow shared. The hope she had somehow felt. None of it had been random. None of it had been coincidence. Somewhere beyond the mountains and forests, another soul had been walking toward the same destiny. The light surrounding the sanctuary slowly faded. The symbols disappeared. The courtyard returned to normal. Yet nothing felt normal anymore. Far away, Rowan opened his eyes and looked toward the eastern horizon. For the first time since the connection began, he smiled. It was small. Brief. Almost impossible to notice. But it was real. Because after days of mystery, uncertainty, and questions, both of them finally understood one truth. Neither of them had been alone. Not for a very long time. And somewhere beyond the distance separating kingdoms, fate had already begun leading them toward the same dawn.